Hi guys, welcome back to sqadia.com. Well, you've already read the title, so you know what the topic of our discussion is going to be today. And you must be wondering that this is such a basic topic. You've probably been, reading about this ever since 7th, 8th grade. So you must be wondering, what is this video going to give me? Or what new will this video add to your knowledge? Well, let me tell you that what this video will do is that it will act as a resource that you can come back to again and again whenever you want to refresh your concepts about agonists and antagonists. We'll be mainly focusing on the dose-response curves and the differences between each type of agonists and antagonists. So without further ado, let's just jump into the video. So, what are agonists and what are antagonists? I mean, you're probably already aware of these terms. But our take on these terms is basically... Hold on, let me get closer to the mic. Now, imagine a tale as old as time. The hero fighting the villain to conquest the land. Now, we can relate this tale to the events in our body as well. Just imagine the agonist as the hero in our story, and imagine the antagonist as the villain of our story, right? And they're fighting for quote-unquote land in our body, which are the receptors, and they're competing for this land, so to speak. In many cases, we can say that these are the receptors in our body. Now, we can also classify agonists and antagonists as ligands. And these can, especially agonists, these can either be neurotransmitters, these can be hormones, or these can even be drugs. And what do is that basically they bind to the receptor and they cause a certain change in the receptor. And in turn, they activate certain pathways or certain mechanisms inside the cell, which we can call as they produce a response in the cell. Now, this response can either be in the form of gene expression or secretion of hormones. And on the flip side, what will the antagonists do? Basically, they are the villains, so they are working against the interest of our heroes. So they will actually compete for the same receptor, and what they will do is that they will stop the so-called conquest of our hero, which was to produce a response. Now, sometimes our heroes will win, and sometimes our villains will win. Now, to determine which side will win largely depends upon the types of agonists that we're talking about and the types of antagonists we are talking about. So these 2 points are very important if we want to learn about the differences between each of them. And in the very next bite or the very next section, we are going to go deeper into the differences between the different types of agonists and different types of antagonists. So stay tuned. Now, there are a few pharmacological terms that you need to keep in mind because we'll be referring to them when discussing the differences between agonists and antagonists. So, the first term we have is the affinity of the drug. Now, this is a measure of how avidly a drug binds to its receptor. And it is characterized by the equilibrium dissociation constant. Okay, this is denoted as Kd. Now, this is the ratio of the rate constants of both the reverse and forward reactions. Now, the reverse reaction is denoted as K-1, and the forward reaction is denoted as K+1. And these reactions are obviously between the drug and the receptor. Now, the reciprocal of Kd is the affinity constant, which is the Ka. And the absence of receptor reserve, this is the concentration of drug that produces 50% of the maximum response. Now, another term that we are going to be focusing on is the intrinsic activity or the intrinsic efficacy. Okay? It can be defined as the affinity of the agonist receptor complex for a transducer. And it can also be described as, the analogy I used earlier, that when the agonist actually conquers the land, that is, that it produces a response. So this can also be called as its intrinsic activity. Now, this response that is produced can be plotted as the dose-response curve. And it has been found by experiment that for many tissues and agonists, when the response is plotted against the concentration of the drug, a curve is produced, which is often hyperbolic. And it's also called, termed as the concentration response curve. Now, in practice, it is often more convenient to plot the response against the logarithm of the agonist concentration, which is the log concentration response curve. So we usually use this log response curve. Now, the next term is the Emax. Now, the Emax can be observed in this graph. It can be described as the maximal effect at high drug concentrations when all the receptors are occupied by the drug. Okay? Now, this is the maximal response of the drug. Now, another term we're going to be using a lot is the agonist potency. Now, potency is the amount of agonist needed to elicit a desired response. And the potency of an agonist is inversely related to its EC50 value, which is the concentration of the drug when 50% of the response is achieved. Now, we also have another term, which is called the receptor reserves, or we can also term it as spare receptors. Now, basically, it refers to the condition in a tissue whereby the agonist binds or needs to activate a small fraction of the existing receptor population to produce a maximal response. Okay, now we have these terms in our mind. Let's lock them up, and now let's move on to the next slide.